On this episode of China Uncensored, who controls China's propaganda? Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Something you may not know about the Chinese Communist Party is that they actually have a propaganda department. That's not me making a swipe at them. It's actually called the Central Propaganda Department, though they've taken to translating it as the Publicity Department lately because, that's better propaganda. Now, propaganda in China has deadly power. Those who control state-run media have a direct line of communication to 1.3 billion Chinese people. In the early 60s, when Mao Zedong was licking his wounds from his disastrous Great Leap Forward, he used the state-run radio, TV, and newspapers to deify himself, whip up the nation's youth into a murderous, almost religious zeal, launch the Cultural Revolution, and smash anyone who opposed him. Using the party's propaganda apparatus, Mao turned around his fortunes from potential political irrelevance to becoming a god. That's the power of good propaganda. So you can imagine if you're a politician in China, say Chinese leader Xi Jinping, you'd want to have a say in what the propaganda department puts out. You also don't want to be on the receiving end of that stick. Now, you might think, wouldn't Xi Jinping by default have control over China's propaganda department? He is the head of the Communist Party, right? Well, it turns out that really doesn't count for much when a good chunk of the party belongs to a rival political faction that's trying to kill you. Ever since coming to power in 2012, Xi Jinping has been annihilating his political opponents under the guise of a so-called anti-corruption campaign, a campaign that has, in reality, targeted officials in a rival political faction tied to former Chinese leader Jiang Zemin. I've talked about that before. The point here is that Jiang's faction isn't going down without a fight, which brings us back to the propaganda department. Unfortunately for Xi, the propaganda department is in the hands of Jiang's faction. At the top of the Communist Party of China is a group of 7 old Chinese men called the Politburo Standing Committee, and they're anything but upstanding individuals. These 3 have the closest ties to Jiang Zemin. Last year, I talked about how Zhang Dejiang, as the head of the National People's Congress, incited the democracy protests in Hong Kong to undermine Xi's position. Today, we'll be talking about this guy, Liu Yunshan. Between 2000 and 2012, Liu was the director of the propaganda department. Now, he continues to control it in his powerful new position as chairman of the Central Guidance Commission on Building Spiritual Civilizations. Yes, that's what it's really called. And a big part of building spiritual civilization is making sure people don't have the wrong spiritual beliefs. People like House Christians, Uyghur Muslims, or Falun Gong meditators. Now, the factional infighting between Xi and the Jiang faction rears its ugly head from time to time in state-run media. Sometimes you see articles calling Xi the greatest leader in the world, but then sometimes you can feel the influence of Liu Yunshan, like when state-run Global Times put Xi Jinping next to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, recently deceased at the time. Or this Xinhua article from 2013 arguing that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's National Security Commission is being used as a way to grab power and pave the road for a dictatorship. It just so happened to be published right after Xi announced his own plans for a National Security Commission. So, how successful were these state-run media swipes at Xi? Well, not too long after, the purging and suicides in state-run media began. Over the past year plus, Xi Jinping, through his so-called anti-corruption campaign, has launched wave after wave of investigation into CCTV and the People's Daily. Staff have been replaced. Even one of the most famous news anchor in China, Rui Chenggang, was suddenly removed. And while Xi Jinping is removing the old guard by force, he's moving people loyal to himself in. At the end of April 2014, he installed his ally Yang Zhenwu as the new director of the People's Daily. And maybe it's this sudden wave of takedowns that's prompted a rash of suicides. In 2014, 6 propaganda officials around China committed suicide. The highest-ranking one was Li Wufeng, the Deputy Director of the State Council Information Office, otherwise known as the Office of Foreign Propaganda. So how is old Liu Yunshan faring in the middle of all this? Well, what do you know? It seems Xi's anti-corruption campaign has started to target him too. Like so many others of the Jiang Zemin faction that have been brought down, there are corruption rumors now swirling around Liu. Hong Kong-based Chengming magazine is reporting that Liu and his whole family were involved in some shady business involving minerals in Shanxi, his home province, and Inner Mongolia, where he spent 2 decades as an official. There's also a bribery case involving Liu's son and a Taiwanese TV drama. Liu's son purchased it for CCTV, but then somehow a lot of that money just disappeared. So how long does Liu Yunshan have left? And what do you think Xi Jinping wants to achieve? Leave your comments below, and as always, click that like and subscribe button so there's more China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time. On this episode of China Uncensored, Zhou Kong, eat your heart out. Eat it! What's that, Shelly? Don't eat it. It's worth $130,000 on the black market? In the future, everything will have a rating. Not just restaurants and pop tunes, but people too. It begins in China.